All right, guys, Joe East here. Let's do some independent fact checking and investigation into the philosophical and definitional terms of COVID-19 or coronavirus or whatever we want to call it. There's a lot of so-called independent fact checkers out there that are not competent to study something with a cold scientific eye and an eye that's quite tuned into BS. So here's an introduction of what we're going to go over, roughly speaking here. And then in the next couple of segments, we're going to deep dive into the block diagrams of what the hell this is. Okay, so we got to ask ourselves, what, who, why, when, where, and why. The two whys, it looks like. But the basic questions you ask as an investigator. And make sure you have an answer for all these whenever you're done investigating. What exactly is going on? We're hearing stuff from governors and so-called authorities and CDC, but they haven't said what exactly is the hell going on. We need to know what's going on, and we're going to define it here. Who is responsible? After we define it here, we're going to determine who is responsible, and usually that's going to happen in a court of law. We had a lockdown. Is it justified? Is it not justified? Is it a criminal act, or is it a force of nature? Okay, so that's going to be determined. First, you have to determine what the hell you're talking about. And none of the scientific papers I've seen have said what it is. So we're going to define what it is in this video. Why is this important? Well, economic loss in the trillions, economies gone in every state in the world. Yes, that's why it's important, because bad things are going to happen no matter what now. So someone has to pay for this. When are we complete or finished with this? There must be an end time for all this stuff. When are we done? When are we done talking about this? When is the lockdown done? And when we're finished, do we have all the perpetrators of, if it's a possible criminal act, or have we completely isolated scientifically what the hell went on and described it, and are we done? Where is this important? So is it important in Texas, New York, California? Maybe some places it might be important at different times, okay? And why do we care? Again, I already answered why. Why is this important? So there's some questions here we're going to get into. So let's dig in. Hey guys, Joe East here. Again, doing this investigation into state of emergency with Corona, or whatever the hell they're calling it nowadays. So this is going to be a more technical video. I'll not use too many dramatic tools to get the point across. We're going to be talking more to technical people here. I want you engineers. I want you scientists who are actually skilled in the laboratory, and I want doctors, physicians, and radiologists and technicians to listen carefully here. As we go through the phenomenon, we're going to break it up into pieces, and then we're going to devise a strategy to prove what the hell's going on out there strictly. And we also need to be understanding of deception detection for various political aims that might be fudging the numbers or faking the numbers for political or money-making ends that are unethical, because this particular thing is costing us all kind of money nowadays with businesses, personal. And so if there's any sort of fraud, we need to call them to account in a court of law with an army of 10,000 lawyers which we will do if this is decided to be some unethical trick. But anyway, I want you technical folks, engineers, scientists that know how to do lab work. I'm not talking about people who just publish papers, not BS and political scientists. Should I say scientists who are political? I want guys who know how to do lab work, know how to analyze data results, know how to do design of experiments. If you can't do design of experiments or don't understand it, go away if you're a scientist or a so-called scientist. I want to talk to engineers, technicians, maybe private investigators, practical physicians that solve problems, and radiologists to go through this with me. And then we're going to call in the lawyers if we think there's some goofy stuff going on. Later on, we'll figure it out and we'll turn it over to the courts. So the source of all the stuff we're going to be talking about, you can go to Google Scholar. I have it at the top line here. Google Scholar. Go ahead and Google this term here, which is supposedly the test that's commonly used to detect the virus. And we're going to get into exactly what the virus is called and what it's not. And look for false negatives and false positives of the RT-PCR test, and also the false negatives and false positives of the CT scans or the CT tests. So that's the two major ways of trying to detect whether or not it's this particular syndrome. So let's go over some of the common definitions and terms, as it were. And like I said, some of you physicians or radiologists might be able to dig into this and email me. You'll see my email at the end of the video, or whatever, text me, email me, or put comments in here so we can dig into what the hell's really this is all about. Specifically, if there's any sort of errors in here, or maybe nuances that need to be brought out, okay? So we're dealing with two things here. We're dealing with a suspected virus that's producing a suspected effect or a suspected symptoms, okay? And the issue here is the virus has apparently been identified as SARS CoV-2, whatever the hell, however you pronounce that. Okay, that's the virus that can be identified with DNA testing, and my understanding is with this RT-PCR test. However, when you dig into the details, this test is actually not as accurate as perhaps we're led to believe. The syndrome itself, the collection of symptoms and the collection of effects supposedly connected to this virus, is called COVID-19. So COVID-19 is not the virus. COVID-19 is the phenomenon that's been observed in the field of what's going on with something that started in Wuhan and apparently has spread throughout the world. That phenomenon is COVID-19. It's a collection of symptoms, more or less, pneumonia plus a few other symptoms related to flu-like symptoms that's been observed. And it's been apparently, in many cases, connected to this particular virus called SARS CoV-2. So no, there is no COVID-19 virus. There's a COVID-19 phenomenon that's apparently connected to this virus right here, SARS CoV-2. Check my facts, check my work here, those of you who know this stuff. So in looking at the scientific papers, I found three main methods of diagnosis. A is observation of the symptoms by a physician. The physician sees this, that collection, that list of symptoms equals COVID-19. Okay, that's cool. Not quite scientific. Not quite real data, but it's very useful for doctors to be able to do that, right? That's cool. The second method of diagnosis is CT scans. Again, it's a radiologist's judgment by looking at the respiratory system and various phenomenon associated with that, and then call it, that's COVID-19. Very useful, very practical if someone's skilled in the art to diagnose people and get them to treatment, right? It's not really scientific, though. You're not these two, A and B, do not connect COVID-19 to any virus. Can't. How can you just look at a person and say, oh, you have this virus right here? There's no way to say that. And with CT scans, there's no way to say you have this virus. They'll say you have the phenomenon called COVID-19. Okay? You got the terminology here. Now, there's a test called the RT-PCR. You can go and figure out exactly what this big long string of words means. It's a DNA test that can identify viral DNAs, and apparently can identify the DNA of this exact virus and determine whether or not it is present or not present. Problem with this test, according to what I can tell, is that there's a lot of false negatives and false positives that we have to deal with here. And taking all of this into consideration, false negatives, false positives with the RT-PCR tests, the inability of CT scans and observations to connect it to any real virus causes problems here, right? The problem is that what they're calling COVID-19 can be pneumonia that's not related to this, or other symptoms that's related to other diseases that are not related to this virus, not related to this particular phenomenon here called COVID-19. That's what we're looking at here. So it appears that the data collection of the phenomenon, say, these websites that collect the number of cases and deaths within each country, gives you a very strange and skewed view of really what's going on here. All right. So let's say it is possible that 75% of these two results from clinics, they're going to just call it COVID-19. They could, and it conceivably may not be connected to this particular virus. That's the cause and effect thing here that we're dealing with good data or bad data. And we're locking down the whole world using totalitarian techniques that were seen in the Soviet Union and in the Third Reich. And that's what makes these definitions very important, is that this phenomenon is being driven for several governments. And I know several states in the USA are now pretty much totalitarian societies based on supposedly this phenomenon here spreading, so-called spreading. All right, so those are that's the context we're dealing here. So in conclusion, we must separate two things out here with the phenomenon of what's going on with some folks getting sick, right? There's the virus, and then there's the syndrome or the diagnosis. These two are not always linked up, because you can have pneumonia or any of these other symptoms without the virus. So the question becomes, how is this spreading? Is this COVID-19 really spreading due to a virus, or is it something else? All right. That's what must be separated, being that we're now talking about totalitarian clampdowns on societies, apparently given these phenomenon here. So that's why this stuff is extremely important. That's why I'm calling doctors, technicians, radiologists, engineers to look at these scientific papers, break them down, and check this stuff that I'm doing here, and contact me. And attorneys are going to have to figure this out. You got to present this in court if all this turns out to be nonsense, or if someone in the administration made the wrong decision. Somebody's got to pay for this stuff. There's no way people can get away with this, even if it is an innocent mistake. You have to pay for your mistakes, even though it may or may not be criminal. Okay. somebody has to pay. So the only proof of SARS CoV-2, whatever this virus is here, the only possible proof on this board is the RT-PCR test. I think there might be another test, but I think the main one out there is the RT-PCR, which identifies the viral DNA, which identifies it as this. And then that particular instance of a testing might be able to be linked up with these symptoms in a particular case. The question is are the symptoms really caused by this? Okay, that's the main question. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. All right, I reviewed some more of the scientific literature. There's not much actually, which is kind of strange, being that we've did a totalitarian lockdown. There's not many scientific papers on this phenomenon. Okay, but what I found is that there's two main tests for diagnosis of the phenomenon of COVID-19. The only one that can detect the virus itself is the RT-PCR test, and the one that and figure out if you got pneumonia in your lungs or whatever is a CT scan. However, this doesn't necessarily link up to the virus. It could be some other virus. It could be pneumonia from a bacterial or whatever, maybe perhaps not viral. So the CT scan really can't tell you if it's the COVID-19 phenomenon. Now this right here is what we should talk about here. And supposedly this is the DNA test for the particular virus, CoV-2 or something. I forget what it was. SARS CoV-2, I think, is the name of the virus, which supposedly produces the phenomenon called COVID-19, as I mentioned in the previous segment. The positive rate is 59%. Once I started reviewing some of the literature, but other papers have it from 42 to 71% positive rate. Now that causes a lot of problems because in a totalitarian lockdown, you're like, okay, what is really causing all this pneumonia or death or fevers and stuff? But this test right here, that's a very troubling percentage that tells you that given a population of 300 million plus in the USA, a large portion of these tests is going to become indeterminate. All right. So if you get a CT scan, it's like 88%. Oh yeah, he's got whatever, pneumonia or something. We're going to call this COVID-19. But this is the real test that tells you the DNA is that virus called SARS CoV-2, whatever the hell. So there's a weirdness to this phenomenon that is muddle-headed thinking. First is the cause and effect of SARS CoV-2 with COVID-19 phenomenon. There's that, which we'll discuss in the next segment. But then there's the detection methods of how do we diagnose this clinically as COVID-19. This is a very disturbing number. Now, those of you who are lay people, in layman's terms, the BS rate of the test kit is about 31%. Like 31% of the cases, we have no idea if they're positive or negative. We just don't know. All right, so you take the cases that are reported by the CDC or whatever state is in, and 31%, it's just with this test here. So let's say they only did CT scans or clinical diagnosis with just symptoms. You have no freaking idea if it's the SARS CoV-2 virus. Right here, you only have 59% of getting it right, and then a 31% of not even knowing what the hell it is. Okay, so this is getting weird the more you dig into it. Most of us scientific types, we're used to taking an instrument and taking a measurement and writing down a number, and I need to measure my phone. How long is it? So many inches, and write down plus or minus so much percent. But a big old swing of 31% for a totalitarian lockdown. I think the entire administration of every state needs to look at this damn video and say, wait a minute. If we got a 31% just on this test, what's really going on? This could be just pneumonia from bacterial, something else. It could be a bad cold that manifests as pneumonia in some people who don't have a good immune system. We're getting into weird territory here when you dig into the scientific papers. Let me see. Yeah, in some studies, the positive rate is between 42 and 71%. In layman's terms, it could be as high as 58% BS rate. That's layman's terms. So, in other words, about 60% of your tests, in some cases, with some procedures, you have no idea if it's positive or negative. That's a bad statistic to implement a totalitarian regime in the USA and around the world, I think. And it also brings into question the cause and effect, like what causes this? Okay, what effects are you talking about and what's causing it? Have you linked up cause and effect? Because remember, a correlation is not causation. Statistics do not prove anything. You have to have a mechanism model to prove something. Mechanical or mechanism type model. Statistics only point to where you got to go do more research. So yeah, this is quite shocking. The more I dig into this COVID-19 related to what we might call coronavirus, which SARS CoV-2 is a particular coronavirus, among many, is what we're talking about today. So there's a lot of fuzziness, sloppiness, non-science stuff going on here where nobody's establishing cause and effect in our test methodologies or not confident once you take a look at the numbers. And how many of these test kits are out there? How many states have these test kits? The data from each state, are they using a combination of these kits plus this, or these kits plus this plus doctor opinions by base observation? What's this data? Was this data hardcore stuff from this guy, or just this guy and that guy, or this guy, that guy, and observation? So all the data come from the states. We don't know what the hell's going on there. We have to have at least 3 sets of data to know what the hell's going on. So it looks like this might be the most accurate in saying, oh, it's probably a virus. This probably tells you how sick somebody is, but it doesn't tell you if it's a virus. And then just plain observation is probably kind of sort of similar to the CT scan. It tells you how sick somebody is, but not what's causing it or how it was transmitted or whatever. So we're getting into weird territory here where I'm going to call the data from the states insufficient, because we need at least 3 data sets. At least 3 data sets. We need to know what this data set is when they say infections and deaths. We need to know this data set when they say infections and deaths, and the third category, just observation by a doctor. What are the infections and deaths determined by that? Because those 3 data sets have different proportions. If the best hardcore virus transmission test gives us a 31% BS rate, we don't even know what we're looking at. We don't know what phenomenon. We don't know what cause and effect is. We see effects, but what's the cause? We haven't established that. And so if this is being used in only, I don't know, 1/3 of the cases, 1/10, or some small proportion, that means most of our numbers are no good. No good for assessment of what's actually going on out there. We're just collecting a phenomenon of CT scans and observations on pneumonia. And we have no freaking clue what it is. What's, the transmission, or should I say the cause of the pneumonia, even if it might not even be transmission. It might be somebody who has a bad immune system and suddenly something triggers in their system and they get sick or whatever with pneumonia. So we're into weird stuff. So the next the next segment, we're going to build a new model on what needs to be done here. Okay. All right, guys, now for the crux. You want to do real science, you have to have a hypothesis table, ultimately. But this is a preliminary to a hypothesis table for those of you who want to do real science. If you don't see matrix stuff like that, nobody's doing real science. FYI, science is not done in text. It's not done in arguments. It's done with hypothesis tables, cause and effect diagrams, stuff similar to this. This is a preliminary. This is not a final hypothesis table. This is more or less a data analysis table. So the test, the RT-PCR, we're going to go over that and what we know about it now. We're going to go over CT scans and then observation, i.e. the doctor's eyes looking at the patient using his professional judgment and making a diagnosis, all right? So with regard to the phenomenon now of COVID-19 and the totalitarian lockdown, lawyers, doctors, technicians, engineers, data scientists, especially laboratory scientists, listen up. The RT-PCR test, what does it say about a virus? Yes, it can detect a virus. Can it tell you if somebody is sick? No. What's the accuracy? Between 50 and 60%. You get it? It can say whether or not there's a virus, but it can't tell you if you're sick. And its accuracy is pretty bad. Okay? Go over that again if you don't get it. If you're a technician, engineer, doctor, lawyer, laboratory scientist, you must understand this. Okay, the CT scan. All right? What does it tell you about the virus? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It can't determine whether or not you have a virus. CT scan cannot determine whether or not you have a virus. Can a CT scan tell if you're sick? Yes. Lungs are full of gunk? Yeah, you're sick. You got pneumonia or something. What's its accuracy? Let's throw up a high number up there, 98%. If your lungs are full of the phlegm, you can't breathe, you got pneumonia. Let's put that about 98%, almost certain. You do a CT scan, will it detect you got pneumonia, you're in danger, you need help, you need oxygen? Yeah, CT scan. Okay, observation by a doctor, professional, with good judgment. Does he know you have a virus? No. He can't look at you and determine if you got a virus or a particular virus. SARS CoV-2. He can't tell you that. Can he tell if you're sick? Yeah, that's what doctors do. Let's put his accuracy at about 95%. Let's say 5%. He might miss a hypochondriac coming into the office, but say 95% of the time he says, yeah, you're sick or you're not sick, right? Okay? Okay, let's go over the two most important ones, A and B. Remember, these so-called test kits that can detect the virus. RT-PCR can detect a virus? Yes. Can he tell you if you're sick? No. He can only tell you if there's a virus present in a sample. He can't tell if you're sick or not. Because you can have a virus and your immune system could be so goddamn strong, nothing happens to you. What's the accuracy? 50 to 60%. That means about 30 to 50% BS rate for layman's terms. 30 to 50% of the time you just won't know whether or not this test means anything. Big stuff. So what it means by this epidemic is that there's a big band of cases and deaths where you have no idea what the transmission of the phenomenon was, whether it's virus, bacteria, or if it's just some guy that got sick because his immune system dropped its level of strength, and then something popped up from within him that was dormant, which does happen. So we're fact checking here, guys. These are the facts. This is the hardcore stuff on the scientific papers, and you can look at the bottom of my show notes, and you can have the links to all the scientific papers I finished reviewing. There are not many of them. Most of them are out of China. Very few from the West. But there's not much out there, and this is what we're seeing. And we're locking down the whole world under totalitarian rule based on something that's, we don't really know what the hell we're looking at here. There's something going on, apparently, but we don't know exactly what it is, it seems like. Or we can't prove anything, put it that way. We can't prove anything in a legal perspective to justify totalitarian methodologies to quote-unquote protect the population, right? If there was a way to say X produces Y with say a 90+% accuracy, then we might be in a good zone of, okay, you have a good case. But this right here, just on the best test we have to say it's a virus, has a big margin of error that's just insane for us to be even talking about it. I mean, something is better than nothing, maybe, but in order to produce policy with guns and courts and lockdowns on the best test we have, this sort of swing in accuracy, fuck that, I say. Again, if I'm wrong, you physicians, laboratory scientists, doctors, and radiologists, post some stuff here, send me an email. But this is starting to say there's something wrong here. There's something wrong here. Fact checking, guys. This is the facts. This is what you do doing scientific investigations and research. You make tables. You make hypothesis tables. You say yes or no. You analyze things. You break them into different categories until they're separate, to where you can make sense out of it. And so I just showed you guys how to make sense of A, B, and C systems of detection for, let's say, any sort of coronavirus, but in specifically COVID-19 phenomenon. The virus name is SARS CoV-2. All right. Next screen. All right, guys, let's give the fundamental question here. What exactly is COVID-19? Now, I read all these scientific papers, and there ain't no clear definition. So one question would be, is COVID-19 a symptoms list? Okay, you got this, and this. You got number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, you got COVID-19. Is it that? Or is it symptoms plus SARS CoV-2 virus? Is it that? It's not clear. It's not clear in the scientific literature. Or is it SARS CoV-2 virus plus anything else? Is that COVID-19? Now, you guys might think I'm crazy, but read the scientific literature. It is not clear what COVID-19 even is. Now, it's clear what the SARS CoV-2 is, but nobody says SARS CoV-2 equals COVID-19. They're not saying that. They're saying SARS CoV-2 produces COVID-19 or is associated with COVID-19. So there's a question mark here of the link between the virus and the phenomenon they're calling COVID-19. They're not clearly defining whether COVID-19 is just a symptoms list, is a symptoms list with this right here, or just this and anything else is still the phenomenon. It's a big problem. Again, if you want to debate me on this, send me the scientific papers that define this stuff. Don't just post commentary in text. I need to see links here. I want to see if anybody in the whole damn world defines COVID-19, how they define it. And it has to be clear. It's either a symptoms list, it's either symptoms plus COVID plus SARS-CoV-2, or it's SARS-CoV-2 plus anything else. That's extremely important in any discussion as to what the hell we're talking about. All right? Now, one guy that was interviewed on London Real, David Icke, he says maybe, I think that the claim he made was that COVID-19 doesn't exist. Now, if this is not defined in a scientific paper, what it is, the isness of it in philosophical terms. What is COVID-19? What defines it exactly? To say, this is COVID-19, this is not COVID-19. And if I can't make a chart, if I can't make a matrix and say, this box contains COVID-19, this box does not contain COVID-19, with clearly marked definitions, if that does not exist, David Icke has a pretty strong claim saying that COVID-19 doesn't exist. The jury's still out, and it's up for the debate, but I have not seen any scientific paper clearly define COVID-19. I mean, you have to define it one of these three ways. You have to. There's no other option. So somebody has to say what the hell it is. This, or this. And if you have a symptoms list, you obviously got to list it. List the symptoms. I mean, you could put caveats in there, this symptom or that symptom, but you have to have a symptoms list. And if you want to link it up with this guy, you have to link it up some way. A symptoms list and this guy, or just this guy, no matter what the symptoms are, which would be kind of weird, but yeah, you can do that. But we need to get that defined, or we're talking nonsense. And the way I read the scientific papers, it's a pragmatic application of trying to figure things out. But until somebody defines what this is, we're all talking nonsense. We're literally talking BS if we do not define what the hell this is. I'm going to repeat myself here. If you are going to argue with me on this, I need links and resources to papers, scientific papers defining it. And if it's not there, it's not there, okay? And then David Icke might be right. He might be right. It might be just a bunch of mushy-headed idiots that don't know what they're talking about, a bunch of criminals trying to screw around with money and move money around. But that's a hypothesis, right? At this point. And we're going to have to get to the bottom of it, being that the whole world's locked down. Somebody's got to pay for all this stuff. Lawyers are going to get involved. And we got to figure out what's going on here and who owes what money and how it's going to get paid for. Eventually. Not now, maybe in the next few months. But eventually the court system's going to take over, and this has to be defined clearly. So court cases can proceed, and then liabilities can be determined. And if there's any criminality to be determined, that's going to define the criminality in a court of law. All right.